I remember the night like a photograph blurred at the edges. The streetlights outside my apartment hummed softly through the fog, casting pale, trembling shadows that stretched across the walls. It was quiet, too quiet, and I could hear my own breath, shallow and uneven. Something about the apartment felt wrong. The static of the old heater pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the floorboards, and every creak of the ceiling sounded impossibly loud. I told myself it was just the city, the wind, my imagination. But when I stepped into the hallway, the light flickered, briefly revealing a figure standing at the far end, just at the edge of the shadow. My chest tightened. I should have turned back. I should have closed the door. But instead, I walked closer. That's when I saw it. The apartment smelled faintly of damp walls. Outside, the city hummed low, muffled beneath the night. Winter had pressed its chill into every corner, and the radiator shivered quietly. A fog drifted in from the hallway, thin, curling like smoke, brushing the edges of my vision. It carried murmurs, just at the edge of hearing. I froze. The whispers were soft, almost polite. They threaded through the stale warmth of my room. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't. Beneath the lamp, beneath the couch, beneath the frame of the window. They bent around corners, stretched too long, as if they were watching. Something whispered my name, softly, tentatively, a breath in the dark. I told myself it was the fog. It couldn't be me. It couldn't be real. But then my hand brushed against the doorframe. Cold, wet, like the fog had pooled there, and I felt a pull. I stepped toward it. The hallway waited, dark and quiet, but humming beneath the walls. The whispers followed, slow, deliberate. I could feel them brush against my skin, a static along my arms, along my neck, every hair rising, every breath shallow. The shadows in the corner moved, not with me, not against me, but alongside. I blinked. They were still. I blinked again. They were closer. The whisper repeated. My name, soft, fragile, like it was remembering me from a long time ago. I followed. The floor felt sticky under bare feet. Cold seeped through the thin rug. The fog swirled with every step. I could taste it, metallic, faint like wet stone. I reached the end of the hall. Dark, empty, but not. A shadow pooled there, heavier than the rest. It hummed quietly, a vibration through the floorboards. I thought of turning back. I thought of retreating into the warmth of my apartment. But curiosity tightened in my chest. Soft, insistent, gentle. The whisper lingered. Closer now. It didn't call me forward, but it didn't let me go. A lull in the fog. A pause in the static. I breathed. The air was thick. I could smell it. Earth and water. And something else. Something faintly sweet. A shadow stretched across the wall. It flickered like a candle caught in a draft. It wasn't mine. It wasn't anything I recognized. I stepped forward. Soft footsteps. Almost mine. Almost not. The fog rippled with the movement. The whisper followed, twisting around corners, curling into the crevices of my mind. I reached the last corner. Nothing there. The shadow had gone. The air was still. I stood in silence. Cold seeped into my bones. I could feel it settle in my chest, my throat. The whisper was gone, but the fog remained. A living thing now, waiting, patient, and for a long moment, I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, echoing. I didn't turn back. I couldn't. I only stood there, listening. The fog brushed my skin again, soft, persistent, and I felt it then. The apartment wasn't mine anymore. Not really. I was just passing through its shadows. A breath, a shift, something slipped past the edge of my vision, gone before I could name it. The whispers might return. They might not. I couldn't know. But the fog would stay. The night hummed around me. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the shadows waited. I stayed, quiet, watching. Midnight pressed against the windows. The apartment held its breath. Cold air curled along the edges of the walls, carrying the faint scent of rain from the streets below. I moved slowly, bare feet brushing the floor. It felt different tonight. Harder, warmer, alive. Then it began. A hum, low, beneath the floorboards. At first, I thought it was a heater. But it wasn't warmth, it was vibration, a pulse beneath my toes. Each step I took echoed in the stillness, soft at first, hesitant, then heavier, like the building was awake. Something was moving below me, something patient, unseen, waiting. I paused. Fingers pressed against the cool wall. The hum rippled beneath my hands, a resonance that seemed almost sentient. The light from the street lamp painted pale stripes across the floor. They stretched, flickered, and trembled with each vibration. Shadows pulled in the corners, bending unnaturally toward the center of the room. I tried to ignore it, told myself the floor was old, but the hum didn't obey reason. It grew louder, deeper, vibrating through my chest. My breath caught. I could feel in my ribs, a static under the skin, soft, insistent. I stepped forward. The boards groaned and hummed in reply. It was almost musical, a note that lingered in the soles of my feet. Something shifted below, a scrape, a rustle, faint but deliberate. I froze. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closer, the air thicker, heavier with anticipation. I could smell it then, earthy, damp, like soil pressed against wood, and something faintly metallic, iron tang under my nose. I stepped again. The hum vibrated upward, higher, sharper. It was following me now, or I was following it. I couldn't tell. The shadows twisted with the vibrations. The corners darkened, stretching toward the middle of the floor. I could see the slight rise and fall of the boards underfoot, subtle, hypnotic. I crouched, hands pressed the floor. Cold seeped through my palms. The hum thrummed in response. A conversation. Wordless. Waiting. I could feel soft footsteps beneath me. Not mine. Not human. A rhythm, careful and slow. Pausing when I paused. Moving when I moved. I swallowed. The room smelled of dust and old wood, but the hum made it taste different. Sharp like copper. Electric. Alive. I inched toward the kitchen. The hum followed, spreading under the tiles now, weaving through every plank. A vibration that could be felt, tasted, even breathed in. Something scuttled beneath the floorboards. Quick, light, intentional. I stopped mid-step, heart thudding in rhythm with the pulse beneath me. I could hear the faintest rustling. Tiny scratches, almost polite. It moved with me, beneath me, invisible but near. The air grew thicker, a fog curling along the edges of my vision. It smelled faintly of rain, of wet leaves pressed underfoot, and of something darker, something waiting. I dared not move. The hum became a drone, steady, vibrating through every bone. My breath felt heavy, caught in my throat. Soft footsteps now seemed to circle beneath me. I touched the floor again. The vibration answered my palm, rising into a resonance in my chest. A message I couldn't understand. A presence, patient, aware. I backed slowly toward the window. The hum followed, relentless, insistent. The shadows swirled in answer, curling and uncurling across the floor. I stopped. The apartment held still. For a moment, silence. The hum faded to a whisper beneath the boards. I could smell damp earth and a faint, sweet decay lingering in the fog. A warning or a welcome. I couldn't tell. I stayed where I was, feet pressed to the floor, hands trembling, listening. The hum had not left. It waited, a presence beneath me. Beneath the world I thought I knew. Patient, hidden, knowing. Outside, the city slept. Inside, the floor whispered, humming beneath me. And I remained alone, breathing with it, half aware of the secrets moving just out of sight. Rain hammered against the windows. Cold sheets of water blurred the streetlights outside. The apartment smelled of damp wood and the faint tang of ozone. The ceiling light flickered, violently. A sudden pulse of pale light, then darkness. I watched. The flash illuminated the corners of the room. Shapes lingered there. Figures. Thin, fleeting, vanishing when I looked directly. My hand brushed the edge of the table. Cold, wet from the storm seeping through the old windows. The light flared again and the shadows shifted, curling and twisting in answer. I tried to hold still. The shapes were patient, waiting, watching. A gust rattled the panes. The room smelled of wet stone, of earth pressed into the air. Every flicker carved the figures deeper into my vision, only to dissolve when my eyes tried to follow. I could hear the hum of the storm, soft, insistent, and beneath it, a subtle static, a vibration from the floorboards I felt earlier. It pulsed in my chest now. The light flickered again. A pale hand, or the memory of one brushing the far wall. Gone before I could name it. I breathed. The air felt thick, moist with rain and something else, metallic, faintly coppery. The shapes lurked in the corners, moving with each pulse of light, yet always avoiding my gaze. I stepped closer. The floor groaned. The hum answered. Cold seeped through my socks, through my bones. Another flicker. A figure crouched low. Eyes that shimmered with the faintest glow. I blinked. It was gone. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and irregular. It echoed in rhythm with the flashing light, with the storm outside, with the hum beneath the floorboards. The shadows shifted again. They whispered in their movements, curling, stretching, reaching just beyond my sight. Soft, subtle, patient. I leaned against the wall. Cold plaster pressed into my shoulder. The light pulsed again, slicing through darkness. A figure in the corner stretched upward, tall, thin, reaching toward the ceiling, then collapsing into shadow. I could feel static in the air, a vibration that prickled my skin. The smell of rain mixed with the scent of old wood, wet and decaying. It made my chest tighten. I moved slowly across the room, each step answered by a murmur beneath the floorboards. The hum was steady now, insistent, as though it were aware of me. The ceiling light flared violently, and there, briefly, a shape lingered near the doorway, tall, thin, faceless, watching, and then it was gone. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, damp, the flicker painted pale stripes along the floorboards. Shadows stretched and shrank with each pulse. I could taste the storm in the air, sharp, metallic, a reminder of the world beyond the apartment. But inside, the room was alive with movement, figures appearing and vanishing, a whisper of motion in the darkness. I stopped. The light dimmed, almost steady, but I knew the storm would make it flicker again. The shapes would return, always at the edges, never fully visible. I could hear soft footsteps, or the echo of them, moving beneath the boards. A rhythm, gentle, patient. They paused when I paused, moved when I moved. I breathed slowly, cold air in, humid air out. The room pulsed around me. Figures lingering, gone, lingering again. I leaned back against the window. Rain tapped against the glass in a relentless rhythm. The light pulsed one last time before settling into a pale, flickering glow. I stayed there, alone with the storm, the shadows, and the hum beneath the floorboards. The shapes never vanished completely, always there, waiting in the corners, just beyond understanding. And I realized something. The light didn't illuminate them. It revealed them, just long enough for the mind to register fear. Then they slipped back into darkness. I listened. The storm roared. The pale light flickered softly, and the shadows waited. I closed my eyes. The figures lingered behind my lids, always at the edges of vision. Patient, patient. I remained still, breathing with the hum, feeling the floor beneath me, the storm outside, the shadows within. The apartment was quiet. Rain had slowed to a soft drizzle outside. Cold seeped through the window frames, carrying the faint smell of wet asphalt. I sat on the edge of the bed, feet bare, toes brushing the thin rug. The floorboard beneath me hummed faintly, lingering from the storm earlier. Then I heard it, soft, deliberate, footsteps outside the apartment door. Slow, measured, like someone pacing a rhythm only they could hear. And somehow it matched my heartbeat. I tried to ignore it, told myself the hallway was empty, that it was the old building settling. But the rhythm pressed against my chest, pressed against my ears. Each step carried weight, not heavy, not clumsy, but certain, confident, intentional, a presence just beyond the threshold. I could feel the vibration in the floor, a subtle tremor beneath my toes, a hum that traveled through my soles, up my legs. The apartment seemed smaller, tighter. The hallway was pale in the dim light, a smear of yellow from the old bulb above. Shadows pulled near the doorframe, stretching like waiting fingers. I could smell it then, a faint metallic scent, coppery, like the echo of rain and iron pressed into the air. The footsteps paused, a single beat, and then continued, soft, slow, deliberate. I held my breath. Fingers pressed against the edge of the mattress. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in rhythm with the steps. My chest throbbed in answer. Another pause. Closer now. I could feel the air shift. A soft rustle at the door, almost like breathing. I told myself I was imagining it, but the footsteps moved again. Steady, slow, matching my pulse. I could not shake the sense of being watched. A shadow stretched under the door. Thin, low, reaching along the carpet. It pulsed with each step, and then vanished when I blinked. The apartment felt colder, air pressing against my skin. Static, prickling the back of my neck. Soft, insistent. I moved slightly. Just an inch. The footsteps paused, then continued, as if in conversation, a rhythm that mirrored my own movement. I pressed my ear to the door, could almost hear a faint hum beneath the soft footsteps, a vibration traveling through the wood, through the threshold, into the room. I tried to breathe quietly. The smell of damp wood and wet air filled my nose, every exhale loud in my ears, every heartbeat louder, sharper, in tune with the footsteps. I dared not look through the peephole. The shadow beneath the door had stretched again. Reaching, waiting, it pulsed with a presence beyond. I could feel my hands tremble, fingers brushing the cold doorknob. The footsteps slowed, a final step deliberate, and then silence. The hum remained beneath the floorboards. Subtle now, patient. The room smelled of rain and iron, and something I could not name. I stayed pressed against the mattress, eyes wide, listening, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. The hallway remained still, but the sense of being watched lingered. I realized I could still feel it. The rhythm, the presence, outside the door, beneath my feet. Patient, patient. I did not move, could not move. I simply waited. The apartment held its breath with me. The soft light flickered in the corner. Shadows stretched and shrank. And I understood something. The footsteps might return. Or they might never have left at all. I lay back on the bed, breathing slowly, matching the hum beneath the floor, the rhythm of the unseen, and the quiet dread of the night. The bedroom was quiet. Night pressed against the windows. The air smelled faintly of rain and dust, dampened by the lingering fog in the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed, feet brushing the rug, cold beneath my skin. The hum of the floorboards beneath me lingered from earlier, subtle, patient. The mirror across the room caught the pale light from the street lamp, a thin strip across the glass, rippling like water. I leaned closer. At first, it reflected the room perfectly. Then something shifted. A shadow moved independently of me. I froze. The shape lingered behind the glass. Tall, thin, indistinct, but deliberate. It didn't mimic my movements. It smiled when I did not. A slow, quiet curvature, watching, patient, waiting. The air grew heavier. I could feel it press against my chest, cold seeping through the thin fabric of the sheets. A metallic tang lingered faintly in my nose. I blinked. The shadow remained, not fully solid, not fully unreal. It breathed in its own rhythm, separate from mine. I tried to look away. My reflection followed me, but the shadow stayed, hovering at the edges of glass, waiting for recognition. A soft rustle from the corner of the room, curtains shifting slightly in the draft. The mirror glimmered again, pale, fractured light. The shadow leaned closer. I could feel static prickling along my arms. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in response. The room felt smaller. The mirror seemed to draw everything toward itself. I moved slowly, hands brushing the edge of the dresser. Cold was beneath my fingertips. The shadow tilted its head when I did not. A faint metallic scent. Iron, rain, something older than the apartment itself. It drifted from the mirror, curling along the floor around my feet. I swallowed, breath caught in my throat. The shadow smiled again. A deliberate, patient smile, never in sync with me. I stepped closer. The floorboards hummed beneath my toes. The air vibrated softly, as though the room itself were alive. The mirror reflected the ceiling, the walls, my own tense posture. But the shadow remained, unmoving in its own strange rhythm. I pressed a hand to the glass. Cold, fingertips tingling, the reflection shivered, independent of me, and smiled wider. A rustle from the curtains. Soft, patient, the shadow leaned closer, stretching its darkness across the reflection of the floor. I could see my own wide eyes. I could see its grin. I tried to step back, feet brushing the rug. The hum beneath the boards answered my movement. The shadow did not move with me. It lingered, patient, aware. I could taste the air now. Sharp, metallic, wet, a scent of something pressed into the wood. Something waiting. I blinked again. It did not blink. Its grin remained, subtle but deliberate, like it had been waiting for this moment. The room pulsed softly with the hum beneath my feet. I pressed my palm against the dresser. Cold, damp. The mirror seemed to absorb the air around it, twisting it into shadow. I could not look away. The shadow mirrored nothing of me. It existed alone, smiling when I was not, moving when I remained still. I sank to the floor, hands pressed to the rug, cold fibers against my skin, breathing shallow, matching the vibration beneath the floor. The mirror reflected the room, and the shadow, patient, waiting, smiling. I closed my eyes, tried to will it away. The smile lingered behind my eyelids, patient, separate, unseen by anyone else. I stayed there, quiet, breathing with the hum, feeling the cold, the static, the presence of something just beyond understanding. The mirror reflected more than the room. It reflected something older, something awake. I did not move, did not speak. The shadow waited, and I remained alone, breathing with it. The apartment was quiet. Night pressed against the windows. Rain had stopped, but the air remained thick and cold, carrying the faint smell of wet stone. I stood in the center of the room, feet bare. The rug beneath my toes felt damp, the fibers pressing against my skin. The floor hummed faintly beneath me, a vibration I had grown used to. Then I noticed it. The walls. They weren't still. A subtle shift, expansion and contraction, slow, deliberate, as if the apartment were breathing. In out and out, I pressed a hand to the plaster. Cold, hard, solid, and yet it moved slightly beneath my fingers. A soft pulse, almost a heartbeat. The air pressed against my skin. Not a draft, but a gentle push, as though the walls were exhaling. A subtle warmth, then cold. It brushed my arms, my neck, my face. I could hear faint whispers in the corners. Too soft to understand, but insistent, curling through a room like smoke, brushing against the edges of the ceiling, drifting into the floor. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in tandem with the breathing walls. A slow, patient rhythm. I could feel under my feet, through my legs, threading into my chest. I stepped forward. The walls expanded slightly, edges brushing the tips of my fingers. I recoiled, then the contraction, soft, subtle, a pulse in the air. The room smelled of damp wood and faint iron. A sweetness lingered beneath it, faint, almost imperceptible. Every breath carried the sensation of being pressed gently, softly, by something alive. I moved toward the window, cold glass under my palms. The light from the street lamp outside flickered across the floorboards. Shadows shifted, curling and stretching with the movement of the walls. I could hear soft footsteps beneath the floor, matching the pulse, the hum, the breath of the apartment itself. Slow, patient, deliberate, I pressed my cheek to the wall. Cold, damp plaster. It trembled lightly beneath me. I could feel its rhythm. In out and out, the corners of the room seemed to draw closer, then recede. A living pulse, measured, steady, deliberate. Faint whispers drifted along the edges of the ceiling, brushing the tops of my ears. Almost like the apartment was aware of me. I breathed slowly, matching its rhythm. Fingertips pressed to the walls, to the floor, to the rug beneath me. The vibration threaded through my body, gentle but insistent. I could feel in the air, the pressure against my skin, the soft movement beneath the floorboards, the subtle shifting of the walls. A flicker of pale light from the street lamp caught the ceiling. Shadows pooled in the corners, bending slightly with each pulse. The room expanded, then contracted again, patient, watching. I knelt on the floor, hands pressed to the damp rug, cold against my palms. The hum beneath me thrummed softly, threading through my bones. The whispers brushed my ears. I could smell the faint tang of iron, the damp wood, and something else, something faintly sweet, pressed into the air. It was older than the building, older than the walls themselves. I lay back slowly, ears pressed to the floor, feeling the vibration rise through me, feeling the walls pulse above, feeling the air press and release against my skin. The apartment breathed around me, alive, patient, watching, a presence in the very structure of the room. I pressed a hand to the ceiling. Cold plaster, tremoring gently. The whispering wrapped around my fingers. The hum threaded through the tips of my toes. I could not see the edges of the apartment anymore. They had softened, blurred with the pulse, the breath, the gentle expansion and contraction. I remained still, eyes closed, breathing with it. In out and out, the apartment was no longer just walls and floorboards. It was alive, patient, ancient, and I was part of its rhythm now, suspended in its slow, deliberate pulse. I stayed there, pressed against the floor, cold, damp, tingling, listening to the soft whispers in the corners, feeling the walls expand and contract, feeling the building breathe around me. And for a long time, I did nothing but breathe with it, alive, watching, patient. The apartment smelled of damp wood and faint ozone. Outside, the streetlights flickered through the fog. The floorboards hummed softly beneath my bare feet. The radio was silent. At least, I thought it was. Then it hummed, low, persistent, a vibration that threaded through the floor and into my chest. Static crackled. The air seemed to thicken around me. A faint metallic scent drifted from the speakers. A voice emerged, distorted, broken, whispering. And it knew me. It spoke of things no one could know. The way I had left the kettle on. The book I had hidden under the bed. Details of nights I had thought were private, unseen. I froze, cold pressed against my skin. A hum beneath my feet, threading with a voice. The apartment seemed to lean closer. I touched the radio. Warm, almost alive. The static buzzed beneath my fingertips. The voice repeated. Closer, more intimate. I could feel the vibrations in the floorboards, the hum in my chest, each pulse matching the cadence of the distorted words. The light from the street lamp fell across the room. Shadows twisted and stretched in time with the hum. The corners seemed to draw nearer, listening with me. I stepped back. The voice followed. Distorted, broken, knowing, intimate, too intimate. I could smell it then. Ozone rain and the faint tang of metal. The voice threaded through the air, wrapping around me like smoke. I pressed a hand to the floor. Cold, damp. The vibration hummed up my arm, pulsing into my chest. The radio static whispered every secret I thought I had kept. I leaned closer again. The voice described the small things. The way I had tapped my fingers against the desk. The pattern of my steps across the floor. The hum beneath the boards. I froze again. The apartment seemed to pulse with the radio. The walls expanded and contracted softly, breathing with me, listening with me. I could feel the hairs on my neck rise. The voice hummed with the vibration of the floorboards. The static twisted, wrapping into a rhythm I could feel, a rhythm I could not escape. I stepped toward the kitchen, cold tile beneath my feet. The radio's hum followed, every detail of my life repeated in the broken, intimate voice. I pressed a palm to the wall. Cold, damp. The hum and the floorboards matched the rhythm of the words. A presence beneath the wood, beneath the walls, beneath everything. I tried to turn off the radio. The static flared, buzzing in my ears. The voice continued, describing the small moments I had thought were mine alone. It knew more than it should. I sat on the edge of the rug, hands pressed to my knees, feeling the vibration thread through me. The voice repeated, patient, deliberate. The air smelled of damp wood and ozone. The static brushed my ears, brushed my skin, curling around the tips of my fingers. Shadows pooled in the corners, twisting in rhythm with the hum. I could not move. Could not turn away. The voice had threaded into the room, into the walls, into the vibration beneath my feet. I pressed my forehead to the rug. Cold, damp, fibrous. The hum pulsed beneath me, steady, insistent. The voice whispered secrets I had long buried. A flicker of pale light from the street lamp caught the wall. Shadows shifted and stretched in the corners. The voice continued, patient, intimate, unnerving. The apartment seemed alive, breathing with it. I lay there, still, breathing with the vibration beneath my feet, feeling the hum thread through my chest, my arms, my fingers. The voice repeated every detail, every secret, every small, unseen motion. I closed my eyes, listening, feeling the static pulse beneath the floorboards. The apartment breathed, and the voice whispered all I had ever thought was mine alone. It knew, it had always known. I stayed there, alone, listening, breathing with the hum, feeling the presence beneath the walls, beneath the floor, beneath me, and I realized I could not escape it. The radio hummed, the static whispered, and I remained patient, small, tethered to the voice and the static. The hallway stretched before me. Dim light from the street lamp outside spilled through the cracked blinds. Shadows pooled along the walls, curling at the edges like smoke. I stopped, a faint rustle in the air, barely audible. The apartment smelled of damp wood and old plaster, faintly metallic. Then I saw them, pale eyes, glinting from the darkness at the far end of the hallway. I blinked. They didn't move when I did, but with each blink, they seemed closer, patient, watching. The floorboards hummed beneath my feet. A subtle vibration threaded through my toes and up my legs. It was slow, deliberate, echoing the presence in the shadows. I tried to step forward. The air pressed against my skin. Cool, damp, curling around my shoulders. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed, steady, insistent. The eyes remained. Closer. They did not blink, just watched, waiting. I could hear faint whispers from the walls, too soft to understand, brushing the edges of my ears. The shadows shifted with each heartbeat, stretching and curling along the ceiling. I stepped again. The eyes inched forward. A slow, creeping motion, deliberate, patient. The hallway felt longer, narrower, as if it expanded and contracted around me. I could smell the air, damp, metallic, pressed into corners. The scent pressed against my nostrils. Cold brushed the back of my neck. I froze, fingers brushing the wall for support. The vibration beneath the floorboards thrummed in sync with my pulse. Soft, deliberate footsteps, or maybe just a hum, answered my movement. The eyes blinked. Or I blinked. I couldn't tell anymore. They were always there, closer with each shift of vision. A draft stirred the hallway. Curtains at the far window quivered. The pale eyes reflected the faint light, glinting like frost. I could feel them watching, patient, deliberate. I inched forward. Cold brushed my calves. The floorboards pulsed beneath my weight, every step mirrored by the hum beneath the wood. Threading through the room, the eyes were nearer now, closer than the end of the hallway. They reflected nothing but their pale glow. Silent, waiting, I could hear my own breath. Sharp, shallow, in rhythm with the vibration beneath the floor. A hum that matched the presence in the shadows. The hallway walls seemed to lean in slightly. A subtle contraction. The air thickened. Whispers brushed my ears again, faint, circling. I stopped. The eyes blinked, or maybe not. Closer, always closer. I could smell it now. Earthy, damp, faintly metallic, pressed into the air. The apartment itself seemed alive, stretching, breathing, watching. I pressed my hands to the wall. Cold, damp plaster. The floor hummed beneath my fingers. The shadows shifted subtly, curling toward the pale glow. I realized I was holding my breath. The eyes were patient. The hum was steady. The whispers, faint but insistent, brushed against my consciousness. I stepped backward. The eyes remained, following, closer with every blink, every hesitation. The hallway stretched with each heartbeat. I pressed myself against the wall. Cold pressed my skin. The vibration beneath the floorboards threaded into my chest, into my arms, into my fingers. The air smelled damp and metallic. pressed with something unseen. The eyes did not blink. They waited, patient, closer, with each heartbeat. I sank slowly to the floor, hands pressed to the rug, cold, damp fibers against my palms. The hallway hummed with the vibration beneath me. I could see them now, faint reflections in the pale light, always at the edges, always waiting. I remained there, breathing slowly, listening, feeling the hum, feeling the presence of the pale eyes in the shadows. And I understood something. They would wait, always, patient, silent, closer with every blink. I stayed pressed to the floor, alone with the hum, the shadows, and the pale eyes in the hallway. The hallway was quiet. Rain had left the air damp and heavy, pressed against the windows. Cold seeped through the floorboards, threading into my socks, into my legs. I stopped in front of the door, the one I had never opened, locked for years. Tonight it was ajar. A sliver of darkness leaked into the hallway. A faint chill pressed against my fingertips as I reached for the edge. The air smelled of damp wood and old plaster. Something else lingered faintly, dusty, metallic, as if pressed into the floorboard for decades. I hesitated. The gap widened as I pushed gently. Inside, the room waited, untouched, and yet subtly rearranged. I stepped in, feet brushing the threadbare rug. The floorboards hummed softly beneath me, a vibration threading into my chest. The walls seemed closer, leaning inward slightly, like the apartment itself was observing. Everything was in place, but something had shifted, a chair angled just slightly, a book cover facing the opposite way. Small, deliberate changes I had not made. I ran a hand along the table. Cold wood, smooth, dusted, but with a faint residual warmth. The room smelled faintly metallic. A breath pressed against my cheek. The window rattled in the draft. Streetlight spilled to the blinds, casting thin stripes across the floor. Shadows pooled in the corners, curling like fingers, patient. I moved closer to the bed, sheets crisp, untouched. Yet the pillow was slightly askew, as if someone had rested there moments before, or perhaps just shifted unseen. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed gently, threading through my toes, my legs, my chest. I could hear faint whispers curling along the ceiling, brushing the edges of my ears. Subtle, deliberate. I leaned down, fingers brushing the rug. The vibration threaded through me. The room, it was alive with small adjustments. Patient, deliberate, watching. I stepped toward the dresser. Drawers closed tight, yet one handle tilted slightly. Not enough to open, not enough to call attention, but enough to feel intentional. The air grew heavier. Cold pressed against my skin, brushing my neck, my shoulders. The hum beneath the floorboards matched my pulse. Slow, steady, insistent. I glanced around the room. Everything familiar, and yet unfamiliar, like the apartment had taken a breath. Rearranged itself subtly while I slept. A faint metallic scent lingered, pressed into the air, mixed with a faint sweetness of dust long settled. It made my chest tighten. I reached for the doorframe. Cold pressed against my palm. The vibration beneath me hummed softly, threading into my bones, a subtle rhythm. Patient, watching. I could see the shadows in the corners shifting, curling toward the pale light. The bed remained untouched. The dresser remained closed. Everything in place, and yet wrong. I pressed a hand to the floor. Cold wood, damp fibers of the rug. The hum beneath threaded upward, insistent, deliberate. The room seemed to exhale softly around me. And out, I knelt slowly, hands pressed to the rug. Cold, damp. The vibration threaded into my chest, into my arms, into my fingers. I could hear faint whispers, almost beyond comprehension. They brushed the edges of the walls, the ceiling, the corners. Patient, curious, deliberate. I pressed my forehead to the floor. Cold, damp grounding. The room breathed around me, shifting ever so slightly, rearranging in subtle ways I could feel more than see. I stayed there, alone, breathing with the hum beneath the floorboards, feeling the walls exhale softly, the door slightly ajar, the room alive, and I realized something. It had always been watching, always adjusting, always patient. I rose slowly. Hands brushed the edge of the rug, the door frame. Cold pressed against my skin. The hum beneath the floorboards continued. Steady, insistent. I stepped back into the hallway. The door remained slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness. A faint breath pressed against my cheek. The apartment exhaled around me. Patient, alive, and the locked room waited. Always waiting. The apartment was still. Night pressed against the windows. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and old plaster, tinged with a metallic hint of rain-soaked concrete. I stood in the living room, bare feet brushing the rug. The floorboards hummed softly beneath me, a vibration threading into my legs and chest. Then I heard it, soft rustling, coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind, a draft slipping through the cracks. But the sound had intent, a deliberate pacing, slow, patient. I stopped moving. The rustling stopped too. A pause. Then it resumed, closer, deliberate, circling the room. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold plaster. The vibration beneath the floorboards hummed in tandem with the rustling, a subtle pulse threading into my fingers, up my arms, into my chest. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the must of old wood. It pressed softly against my neck and cheeks. The rustling moved in sync with my own heartbeat. Every pause, every step, mirrored by the sound behind the walls. I leaned closer, listening. The sound circled the room again. Soft, deliberate, patient. I could see the shadows in the corners, stretching and curling under the pale light from the street lamp. They shifted with the rustling, following its rhythm. The apartment felt alive. Watching, listening. I stepped forward. The rustling stopped. A breath pressed against my cheek. A faint metallic tang lingered in the air. I could feel the vibration beneath the floorboards. A slow, steady hum threading into my legs and chest. The rustling resumed, circling again. Closer, patient, deliberate. I pressed my forehead to the wall. Cold, damp plaster. The rustling mirrored my small movements. A presence behind the wall. Aware, waiting. The air shifted slightly. A draft brushing my arms and neck. The faint tang of iron mixed with the musty scent of old wood. The rustling paused. I froze. Then it moved again. Soft, deliberate, echoing across the walls. I could feel it circling the room. The vibration beneath the floorboards pulsed with it. I sank slowly to the floor. Hands pressed to the rug. Cold, damp fibers under my palms. The hum threaded into my chest. The rustling paused as I held my breath. A faint shadow shifted in the corner of the room, moving slowly, curling toward the pale light. The sound resumed, deliberate, circling, patient. I could hear my own heartbeat, a slow rhythm, echoed by the vibration beneath the floorboards. The rustling moved in tandem. Following, waiting, I pressed a hand to the wall again. Cold plaster. The air hummed faintly around me. The apartment itself seemed alive, breathing, patient, watching. I remained still. The rustling moved, soft, deliberate, circling the room, pausing when I did, resuming when I breathed. I could smell the faint metallic tang again, pressed into the air. The hum beneath the floorboards threaded through my arms and chest. The shadows in the corners stretched and twisted, curling toward the sound. I leaned against the wall, cheek pressed to cold plaster. The rustling circled, patient, a presence just beyond the surface, aware of me, watching. I lay down slowly, hands pressed to the rug, cold, damp grounding. The hum beneath threaded through me. The rustling continued, slow, deliberate, in time with the vibration beneath my feet. The air shifted softly, a faint pressure against my skin. The apartment seemed alive, breathing around me. The rustling moved again, patient, aware. I closed my eyes, fingers pressed the floor, feeling the hum, feeling the presence in the walls. The soft, deliberate rustling circling, waiting. And I understood something. It had always been there, patient, watching, aware of every movement, every breath. I remained still, alone with the hum, the rustling behind the walls. And the apartment, alive, breathing, patient. The elevator smelled faintly of metal and damp air. The buttons glowed dimly under my fingertips. Outside, the hallways were quiet, pressed with fog from the street lamp light. I stepped in. The doors closed with a soft shiver. The hum beneath the floorboards threaded through the metal plate beneath my shoes. Cold pressed against my heels, rising into my calves. I pressed the button for my floor. The elevator shuddered, a soft vibration threading into the walls. Then it moved, slowly, and stopped between floors. The hum changed, lower, insistent, vibrating through my chest. A soft static whispered in the air. I glanced around. The corners of the elevator were darker than usual. Shadows pooled there, stretching, curling like smoke. One lingered, still, patient, pale, stretching along the steel wall, just beyond the edge of the light. I blinked. The shadow shifted, just slightly, following the rhythm of my breathing. A presence in the corner, waiting, deliberate. The air smelled faintly metallic, pressed with the odor of damp concrete. My fingertips brushed the railing, cold, smooth, vibrating softly with the elevator's pulse. I stepped back. The shadow remained, patient, waiting. A soft rustle, almost imperceptible, moved along the metal panel. The hum beneath the floor threaded through my legs, my chest, into my arms. The shadow leaned with the subtle motion of the elevator, patient and deliberate. I pressed my hand to the wall. Cold steel, smooth. The vibration pulsed with the shadow. I could feel its presence circling the elevator. I glanced toward the door. The display flickered. Floor numbers blurred. The hum thrummed. A breath pressed softly against my neck. The shadow seemed closer, almost palpable, edges curling toward the pale light. Patient, watching. I pressed my fingers to the floor, cold metal beneath my palms. The vibration hummed upward, threading into my chest. The rustle followed, soft, deliberate, circling. The elevator shivered slightly. Lights flickered. The shadow remained, still at first, then stretching toward the far corner, a presence moving just beyond the edges of perception. I stepped forward. The shadow leaned back, patient. The hum pulsed beneath me, steady, insistent. A faint metallic scent lingered, pressing against my cheeks. The display blinked again. The numbers remained between floors. The hum threaded in sync with the shadow's subtle motion, almost like it was pacing. I sank slightly toward the floor, hands pressed to the metal, cold, grounding, damp with condensation. The hum threaded through my fingers and up into my chest. The shadow lingered, patient, watching. The rustling along the edges of the walls moved in subtle rhythm, pausing when I did, resuming when I breathed. The doors began to open slowly. The pale light from the hallway spilled in. I squinted. The shadow remained in the corner for a heartbeat longer. And then nothing. Empty hallway. No one there. Only the faint hum beneath the floorboards and the lingering metallic scent. I stepped out, feet brushing the cold floor. The hallway smelled damp, pressed with a faint trace of iron. The shadows curled back into corners, patient. I glanced back. The elevator doors were open, silent. No shadow, only the hum threaded beneath the floorboards, steady, insistent. I walked slowly, cold pressing against my neck, my arms. The rustle of my own steps mingled with the lingering vibration. The hallway stretched quietly around me, patient, watching. I pressed a hand to the wall. Cold plaster. The apartment breathed softly. Around me, beneath me, the shadow had vanished, but I could feel it, patient, aware, waiting. I continued down the hallway, alone, breathing slowly, feeling the hum beneath my feet, threading into my chest, into my arms. The shadows in the corners curling, stretching. The elevator remained behind me, silent, empty, but the memory of the shadow lingered, patient, waiting. And I understood, finally, that it would always be there, watching, in the corners, in the hum, in the subtle vibration beneath my feet. I kept walking, alone, the apartment breathing around me, the shadow patient, waiting. The night pressed softly against the windows. Streetlight filtered through the blinds, thin stripes across the floor. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and dust, mixed with the metallic tang of the radiator. I looked up. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The ceiling was still, smooth, pale, but then I saw a crack, thin at first, threading across the plaster, like a hairline vein. I blinked. It had grown, stretching, branching, organic, curving in ways that felt unnatural. A draft stirred the room. Cold brushed my arms. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed softly, a vibration threading up my legs into my chest. I stepped closer. The cracks seemed deeper now, edges curling like thin paper, fragile. And sometimes they seemed to whisper. I held my breath, a faint static in the air, brushing the edges of my ears. The whispering wasn't words. Not yet. A cadence. Patient. Waiting. The shadows in the corners shifted, stretching along the walls, leaning toward the ceiling as if drawn to the fractures. The apartment itself felt alive. Breathing slowly, deliberately, I touched the floorboards. Cold, solid. The hum threaded into my palms, up my arms, into my chest. Every heartbeat echoed the vibration beneath me. I could smell the faint iron in the air, pressed with the must of old plaster. A subtle scent, clinging to the edges of the room. I lay back slowly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The cracks seemed to pulse gently. A subtle rhythm, patient, deliberate. I could feel it in the vibration beneath me. A soft rustle. From above. Or maybe from within the cracks themselves. The whispering threaded through the still air, brushing my ears. I pressed a hand to the floor. Cold, grounding. The hum beneath the boards pulsed with the ceiling. The cracks stretched, curling organic. The light shifted. Streetlight flickering through the blinds. Shadows twisted across the walls. The ceiling seemed to breathe with the apartment. In and out, I tried to focus on the pattern of the cracks. They were like veins, branching, twisting. Sometimes they seemed to shimmer faintly, a subtle pulse of pale light. I felt the air press against my cheeks, cold and damp. The metallic tang stronger now. The whispering curled along the ceiling's fractures. Patient, watching. I pressed my forehead to the rug, cold fibers beneath my palms. The hum threaded into my chest. The cracks seemed closer now, curling toward me. I could hear faint breathing. Not mine. Something pressed against the ceiling. Patient. Watching the room through the fractures. I remained still. The cracks shifted subtly. A whisper brushed the edges of my ears. A sound, barely perceptible, like static carrying intent. The air smelled of dust, iron, damp plaster. Cold pressed against my neck. The hum beneath threaded through my arms and legs. Every vibration mirrored the subtle rhythm above. I opened my eyes slowly. The cracks pulsed, organic, deliberate. Stretching, twisting, watching. The whispering faded into the hum beneath the floorboards. I pressed a hand to the rug again. Cold, damp grounding. The ceiling seemed to lean in slightly. The apartment itself exhaled softly around me. I lay still, breathing with the hum, listening to the faint whispering through the fractures, feeling the cold press against my skin. The apartment alive around me, patient, deliberate, and I understood it had always been there, watching, waiting. The cracks, the hum, the whispering, patient, deliberate, silent. I stayed pressed to the floor, alone with the hum, the shadows curling in the corners, the fractured ceiling above, and the silent dread that pressed softly against my chest. The room exhaled around me, slow, patient, watching, and I remained still, feeling every vibration, every whisper, every subtle movement of the living apartment above. The dawn was pale and thin. Frost traced patterns along the window panes. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and damp wood. I moved closer. The room felt colder than usual. Every breath pressed against my chest, shallow, deliberate. Then I saw them, handprints, pressed into the frost. Delicate, small, impossible, because no one had been there. I pressed a fingertip to glass. Cold bit into my skin. A shiver ran up my arm, threading through my chest, lingering. The frost cracked faintly beneath my touch. The hum beneath the floorboards vibrated softly. A subtle pulse, threading through my legs and arms. The shadows in the corners leaned toward the window. Patient, curious. I traced the handprint slowly. The glass pressed icy against my palm. Every movement sent a shiver curling along my spine. The room smelled faintly metallic, pressed with the scent of frozen air. I could see my own breath fogging the window. It mingled with the frost, the handprints twisting along the glass. A faint vibration beneath my feet threaded into my chest, steady, insistent. I pressed both hands to the window. Cold seeped through my skin. The frost etched against my palms. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in sync with the subtle rhythm of the apartment. I stepped back slightly. The handprints remained, unchanged, silent, patient. The shadows along the walls stretched toward the light. The apartment seemed to lean in slightly, listening, watching. Every creak of the floorboards echoed softly in the empty room. I placed a finger on one handprint again. Cold, bit deeper this time. A shiver threaded into my chest. The vibration beneath the floorboards mirrored the pulse of the frost beneath my fingertips. I could smell the faint tang of iron, pressed in the cold air, mingle with the musk of the room. The handprints seemed to shimmer faintly in the morning light, alive, patient, deliberate. I pressed my forehead to the window, cold glass against my skin. The shiver ran deeper now, threading into my arms and legs. The apartment exhaled softly around me, slow, deliberate. The shadows in the corners shifted slightly, stretching, curling toward the frost, toward the handprints. The hum beneath the floorboards threaded through the room, steady, insistent. I stepped back and traced the outlines of the handprints with my eyes. Curled fingers, faint lines pressing the frost. They seemed to pulse faintly, like a subtle heartbeat in the glass. Patient, watching. I pressed my hands to the floorboards. Cold, grounding. The vibration hummed through my arms and chest. The frost on the window remained untouched, silent, waiting. A breath pressed softly against my neck, cold air threading through my hair. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in gentle rhythm. The apartment itself seemed alive, watching. I pressed my palm to the window again. Cold biting, shiver threading up my spine. The handprints remained, patient, unmoving. The morning light grew slowly. Shadows shifted in corners, stretching, curling, patient. The hum beneath the floorboards continued, insistent. I could feel it in my chest, threading into my arms and fingers. I stayed pressed against the window, alone, breathing slowly, feeling the apartment around me. The frost and handprints patient, deliberate, waiting. And I realized something. They had always been there. The cold, the frost, the invisible presence pressing against the glass. I stepped back slowly, hands brushing the floorboards. Cold pressed against my skin. The hum threaded through me, steady, insistent. The handprints remained. The frost shimmered faintly in the growing light. The apartment exhaled softly, patient, watching. I moved away, alone in the quiet room, the frost lingering on the glass, the shiver threading through my chest, lingering, the apartment alive, breathing softly, deliberate, and the handprints waited, silent, patient, always waiting. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and old paint. Morning light seeped through the blinds in pale stripes. The air pressed cold against my skin, subtle and insistent. The closet door moved slightly, a soft swing. The hinge whispered against the frame. I froze. The door had been shut yesterday. Locked, even. A cold wind escaped from the opening. It pressed against my arms, my neck. A faint laughter threaded through the chill. I stepped closer, hands brushing the air, feeling the cold pressing outward. The hum beneath the floorboards threaded into my legs, into my chest. The apartment breathed around me. The door swung again, slowly, patiently. The wind spilled, carrying the faint laughter. It lingered, curling in the corners, brushing my ears. I pressed a hand to the floor. Cold, solid, the vibration beneath threaded upward, pulling at my chest. The closet seemed alive, breathing with the apartment, deliberate. I reached for the door. Cold pressed against my fingertips. The hinges whispered, subtle, deliberate. Another swing, another burst of cold, carrying the faint laughter. The shadows along the walls stretched toward the closet, patient, curious. I could feel them pressing lightly against my skin. The hum beneath threaded in sync with the swings. A subtle rhythm, steady, insistent. I stepped back slightly, hands brushing the floorboards again. Cold pressed upward, threading into my arms and chest. The door moved again. Faint laughter drifted with the cold wind. Patient, persistent. I pressed my forehead to the wall. Cold plaster against my skin. The room hummed softly around me. The closet breathed, alive, deliberate. The laughter wrapped itself around the edges of the air, soft, quiet, unnerving. I tried to focus. The hinges whispered. The wind pressed against my neck. I felt it crawl along my arms, a subtle shiver threading through me. I pressed a hand against the door. Cold, solid. The swing slowed, but it never stopped. Every time I moved, it responded. Patient, deliberate. The shadows shifted again, leaning toward the door, stretching, curling in the pale morning light. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed softly. The air smelled faintly metallic, pressed with the chill. I stepped back, breathing slowly, hands brushing the floorboards. Cold pressed into my palms. The door swung again. The wind brushed against my cheeks. Faint laughter carried with it, curling in the corners. I leaned lightly against the wall, cold pressing through my sweater. The hum threaded through my chest. Steady, the apartment seemed to exhale around me. The closet door moved with patient intent. I pressed my fingers to the cold handle. The wind pressed into my palms. The faint laughter lingered. It was patient, waiting. The door, the wind, the shadows, the hum, all deliberate. I let my hand drop. The closet continued its subtle dance. Cold brushing the floor, the walls, my arms. The laughter wound softly through the corners. I sat on the floorboards, cold beneath my palms, grounding me. The door swung slowly. The air hummed, patient, deliberate. I stayed there, alone, feeling every pulse of cold, every whisper of wind. The apartment breathing softly around me. The closet door patient, insistent, alive, and I understood, slowly, it would never rest. The swings, the cold, the faint laughter curling in the air. Patient, waiting. I pressed my forehead to the floorboards, cold against my skin. The hum threaded through me. The closet breathed softly, and I remained still, alone, breathing with the apartment, with the cold, with the patient, insistent laughter. The sky was pale, tinged with the first light of morning. Cold air pressed against the window pane. The apartment smelled faintly of damp wood and the metallic tang of frost. I paused in the hallway, a soft rustling above, a footstep, slow, deliberate. I froze. The rhythm was patient, measured. No one should have been there. The roof was empty. Another step. The vibration pressed softly against the ceiling, echoed into my chest, threading along my spine. The apartment hummed quietly beneath me. I stepped closer to the window. Cold brushed my fingers as they trailed along the sill. The shadows in the corners leaned toward the ceiling, patient, waiting. Footstep, closer, each one deliberate, heavy with intent. The air grew colder, pressed against my cheeks, my neck. I pressed my hands to the floorboards. Cold, solid. The hum beneath threaded into my arms and chest. Every vibration matched the rhythm above. Another step. The shadows along the walls stretched upward. Patient, curious. The air smelled faintly metallic, pressed with cold. I held my breath. The footsteps paused. A silence stretched across the apartment, thick and deliberate. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, heavy, insistent. I moved lightly toward the window, fingers brushing the cold glass. The frost had begun to form in the corners, delicate, crystalline. The roof above was empty, yet the steps had been real. A soft draft pressed through the apartment. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in quiet rhythm. I felt it in my chest, threading along my arms and legs. Footstep, closer, then nothing. The air pressed against my skin, cold and patient. The apartment itself seemed to lean inward, listening, watching. I pressed my forehead against the window, cold biting through my skin. The vibration beneath threaded upward, in sync with the silent steps above. The shadows in the corners shifted slightly, leaning, curling. Another step, closer, and then it stopped abruptly. A pause heavy in the air. The apartment hummed softly. The silence pressed against my ears. I pressed my hands to the floorboards again. Cold, solid, grounding. The hum threaded through my chest. The shadows leaned closer to the ceiling, patient, deliberate. The footsteps had stopped, yet the air pressed against my skin, carrying a subtle chill. The apartment exhaled slowly around me. The rhythm of the steps seemed to linger in the hum beneath the floorboards. I stepped back slightly, hands brushing the cold floorboards. The vibration threaded through my arms and fingers. The shadows in the corners remained patient, waiting. Another pause. The silence stretched. The hum beneath the floorboards continued, steady, deliberate. The cold pressed into my skin, wrapping my arms and chest. I pressed a hand to the window again, frost clinging to my fingertips. The air smelled faintly metallic, the cold sharp and alive. The footsteps had vanished, yet the apartment seemed aware. Patient, watching, I lay lightly against the floor. Cold pressed against my palms and forehead. The hum threaded through me. Every vibration mirrored the rhythm of the vanished footsteps. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, feeling the apartment around me. The cold pressing softly against my skin, the shadows leaning inward, patient. And I understood the roof, the footsteps, the pause, abrupt and deliberate. It had never left. The apartment itself had carried them. I remained still, hands pressed against the floorboards, cold threading through my arms and chest. The hum beneath continued, steady, patient. The apartment alive around me. The vanished footsteps lingering in the vibration, in the cold, in the shadows. Alone, breathing slowly, feeling every subtle movement, every silent pause, every deliberate, patient presence above. The roof was empty. The footsteps stopped, but the apartment waited. Patient, deliberate, watching. The hallway was dim, pale light leaking from the living room. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and damp plaster. The apartment pressed quietly against my skin, patient, alive. I leaned toward the peephole. Curiosity, slow and insistent. I pressed my eye against the cool metal. At first, it seemed ordinary, the familiar layout. The sofa, the table, the light flickering softly in the corner. Then something shifted. The furniture was slightly off, angles wrong, chairs leaning where they shouldn't. Shadows lingered in the corners longer than they should. I blinked. The air seemed heavier. The hum beneath the floorboards pressed upward into my chest. The apartment breathed around me. I pressed my forehead to the door, cold metal against my skin. The peephole shimmered faintly. It reflected something alive, deliberate. The shadows moved subtly, flickering, curling along the edges of the furniture. Patient, waiting. The air smelled faintly metallic, mingled with the subtle warmth of the morning light. I leaned closer. The layout shifted again. The table's leg rested at an impossible angle. A chair hovered faintly above the floor, shadows pooling beneath. The apartment beyond the peephole was familiar and wrong. I pressed my hands to the door, cold against my palms. The hum beneath threaded into my arms and chest. Every vibration mirrored the subtle movement in the mirrored apartment. The shadows shifted more deliberately now, curling along the floor, pooling near corners, lingering near the ceiling. Patient, observing. The hum beneath threaded slowly, in sync with the subtle, surreal shifts that I drew my breath slowly, feeling the apartment around me. The cold pressed against my skin. The metallic tang lingered faintly in the air. The light flickered softly that I focused on the peephole again. A chair rocked slowly, back and forth, without hands. The sofa seemed to shift slightly, as though exhaling. Shadows pulled deeper along the walls, that I pressed my eye against the metal again. The room reflected mine. But something alive lingered in the angles, the corners, the subtle misplacement that I stepped back slightly, hands brushing the cold floorboards. The hum beneath threaded into my chest. The apartment exhaled softly, deliberate. Another blink. The room shifted again. The shadows lingered at impossible angles. A soft movement in the corner. Faint. Patient. I pressed a hand to the door. Cold metal against my palm. The peephole shimmered faintly. It mirrored the apartment, but the reflection was deliberate, alive, watching. I leaned my forehead to the floorboards. Cold pressed against my skin. The hum threaded through my arms and chest. The reflected apartment lingered in the metal, moving subtly, impossible, patient. I felt the air shift. The faint metallic tang pressed into my senses. Shadows stretched along the ceiling and walls of both apartments. Patient, curious. I pressed a fingertip against the door. Cold biting, shiver threading up my arm. The apartment beyond the peephole pulsed, subtly, deliberate. The shadows moved, curling, stretching. Each subtle movement threaded through the hum beneath my feet. I stepped back, still watching. The room reflected mine, yet wrong, slightly impossible, patient, waiting, alive. I pressed my forehead to the door again. The cold pressed against my skin. The hum beneath threaded into my chest. The shadows lingered. The furniture shifted impossibly. I breathed slowly, hands pressed against the floorboards, feeling every vibration, every subtle shift. The apartment outside the peephole mirrored mine, yet moved with intent, deliberate, patient, watching. I stepped away, alone, the hallway quiet, the light flickering softly, the metallic tang lingering, the apartment exhaling around me, and I understood, quietly, the reflection was alive, not just a mirror, a patient presence, deliberate, waiting. I pressed a hand to the floorboards. Cold, grounding. The hum beneath threaded through me, soft and insistent. The shadows lingered in corners. The mirrored apartment remained alive in the peephole. I stepped back slowly, breathing slowly, feeling the apartment around me, the reflection watching. Patient, deliberate, the peephole remained, shimmering faintly in the pale morning light. The mirrored apartment waited, shadows curling along impossible angles. Alive, patient, watching. The hallway was quiet. Morning light pressed pale and soft against the walls. The air smelled faintly of old wood and damp plaster. I stepped toward the first doorway. The frame hummed gently under my fingers. A subtle vibration pressed through my palm, rising along my arm into my chest. I hesitated. The sound was musical, soft, almost pleasant, yet beneath it a faint tension lingered. The apartment itself seemed to breathe around me. Another doorway. The hum shifted slightly. Higher now, subtle and insistent. A trace of metallic tang touched my nose. I pressed my hand against the frame. Cold, solid, the vibration threaded into my chest. I felt the subtle presence, patient, curious. I moved slowly down the hallway. Doorframe after doorframe hummed beneath my touch. Soft, delicate, yet one hummed louder. It resonated, a low vibration threading into my stomach. The hum carried something deliberate, almost sentient, a presence lingering, waiting. I pressed my palm against it. Cold, the vibration traveled, coiling softly along my arm, brushing against my ribs. My breath caught. The apartment leaned slightly, patient, attentive. I stepped back. The hum pulsed slowly, measured. Each vibration threaded through the floorboards beneath me. The air smelled faintly metallic, tinged with the coldness of early morning. I leaned closer. The doorway hummed stronger, deliberate. The shadows of the edges of the hallway stretched upward, curling softly along the walls. Patient, observing. I pressed a finger against the cold wood. The vibration carried subtly into my chest. A trace of unease threaded through me. The apartment hummed softly along every wall, every corner, every shadow. I moved my hand lightly along the frame, feeling the subtle pulse beneath my fingers. The hum was deliberate, not mechanical, not accidental. Alive. Another step forward. The vibration grew, resonating with the floor beneath me. It pressed into my feet, threaded upward into my legs. The air shimmered faintly, cold against my cheeks. I pressed my forehead against the doorway. The hum wrapped around my ears, a low, soft insistence. The shadows leaned closer to the walls, pooling, curling, patient, curious. I drew my breath slowly, hands brushing the doorframe. The cold pressed softly against my skin. The vibration threaded through my chest. Every subtle movement of the apartment pressed against me, deliberate, alive. Another vibration, a low pulse that threaded through the air itself. I felt it along my spine, soft, insistent. The doorway hummed louder than the others, deliberate, patient. I stepped back slightly. The apartment seemed to exhale softly. Shadows curling along the walls. Light flickering softly in the corners. The hum lingered. I pressed my palm to the cold floorboards, feeling the subtle vibration thread into my chest. Every doorframe carried a faint pulse, but this one hummed with intent. The apartment's presence seemed strongest here, patient, deliberate. I held my breath. The air shimmered faintly, metallic and cold. The vibration threaded softly along my arms. The shadows leaned inward, curling, patient, watching. I moved away slowly. The hum followed faintly, lingering, soft. Every vibration mirrored in the floorboards beneath me. The apartment hummed around me, deliberate, alive, patient. I stepped into the hallway center, breathing slowly, feeling the apartment's presence wrap softly around my chest, my arms, my legs. The doorway hummed faintly behind me, patient, deliberate, alive. I pressed a hand to the cold floorboards, feeling the pulse beneath me. The shadows curled along the walls, leaning inward, patient. The air smelled faintly metallic. The doorway hummed, soft and insistent, carrying the apartment's quiet awareness. Alone, breathing slowly, feeling every vibration, every subtle presence. The humming doorway remained, patient, deliberate, watching. The window was cold beneath my fingers. Dawn's pale light pressed against the glass. Outside, the alley yawned, empty and silent. Then the fog rolled in, soft at first, thin, a silver haze curling along the bricks, pressing against the walls. I leaned closer. The air smelled damp, sharp with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt. A faint rustling threaded through the mist. Whispers, soft, insistent, hushed voices curling like smoke around my ears. I felt them before I heard them, pressing lightly against my chest. The fog shifted closer, sliding along the alley. A pulse of cold air brushed my cheeks. The whispers carried words I could not place, each syllable teasing, curling around the edges of my mind. I pressed my hand to the glass. The cold seeped through my palm, threading into my wrist. The fog swirled more densely, thickening like breath. It seemed alive, aware, deliberate. I tried to see shapes. Shadows moved within the mist. Fingers of darkness stretched along the brick. They flickered and vanished with each blink. The voices pressed closer, soft, incomprehensible, yet intimate, like they knew me, knew the shape of my thoughts. A shiver threaded down my spine. The alley smelled of damp metal, wet stone. Every rustle of the fog carried the hint of voices, distant and near. It pressed against the window now, light and cold, curling softly over my shoulders. I leaned out slightly, careful. A soft draft brushed my lips. The whispers licked along the edges of my senses. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, in rhythm with the mist. The fog deepened. Silver threads wrapped the lamplight in the alley. Shadows quivered inside it, subtle, patient. A presence hummed faintly beneath the whispers, alive and watching. I pressed my forehead against the glass. The fog pressed back, cool, insistent. The voices were closer now, curling in through cracks of the window. Soft syllables brushing my ears, brushing my thoughts. I drew a slow breath. The mist carried the faint tang of wet stone and something else. Something faintly metallic, cold, deliberate. It pressed along the window pane, patient, teasing. A shadow flickered within the alley. Gone when I blinked. The whispers shifted, curling, soft, lingering. They beckoned without words, coaxing, deliberate. The fog swirled, coiling along the walls beneath the lamplight. It pressed lightly against the windowsill. A coldness brushed my fingers. The whispers threaded beneath it, gentle yet insistent. I could feel it breathing, the fog moving with intent. I pressed my cheek against the cold glass. The alley was alive with soft murmurs, curling and threading around my thoughts. I could almost follow them if I leaned closer. The voices lingered, patient. I stepped back slowly, feeling the cold recede. The fog thinned slightly. curling along the alley like smoke. Yet the whispers remained. I held my breath. The mist pressed gently against the wall. A subtle pulse of awareness, watching, patient. Alone, I stepped away from the window. The alley was quiet again. The fog lingered, thin and curling. The voices softened but did not fade entirely. They waited, patient. I could still feel them brushing against my thoughts, gentle and persistent. The pale light pressed softly into the room. The whispers lingered at the edges of my mind, soft, elusive, deliberate. Alone I turned. The fog outside seemed to sigh. The whispers settled into silence. For now, the apartment felt still, too still. The faint hum of the city outside barely reached the room. I noticed at first with the books. Each one angled slightly toward me, even when I had set them straight. The edges of their covers seemed to tilt like silent heads. Pictures leaned subtly, faces turned. I could feel eyes tracing me across the walls. Cold, almost imperceptible. The furniture was no different. Chairs angled ever so slightly toward where I sat. A table seemed to shift, its surface catching the pale light just right. I could almost see it breathe. I walked slowly through the apartment. Every step pressed against the soft on the floorboards. A draft brushed my arms. Shadows pulled at the corners, deeper than the dim light warranted. The silence was not empty. It pressed, heavy, expectant. I reached for a glass on the counter. It was aligned, facing me. I froze. Did I place it like that? The air smelled faintly of cold metal and dust. I shivered. Each movement I made seemed anticipated. A brush of wind, a static shiver along my skin. I turned toward the bedroom. The bedspread rippled slightly, though there was no breeze. A chair by the desk tilted, angling as if to follow me. Soft shadows lingered beneath the desk legs. I stopped in the center of the room. Everything seemed to lean toward me. Silent acknowledgement. Watching. The hum of the city seemed distant now. Closer was the silence of the apartment. Dense, waiting alive. I touched the back of a chair. It was cold, unnaturally still, yet the angle of its seat perfectly directed toward me. I pulled my hand back slowly. Books on the shelf rustled faintly, as if sighing. Frames on the wall caught the light. Every face seemed to tilt, subtle, deliberate. The air smelled faintly of paper and cold wood. I walked to the window. Outside, the alley was empty. The fog had thinned, yet I could feel the gaze of the room pressing against my back. I turned slowly. The apartment seemed almost to lean, bending its walls toward me. A shadow stretched across the floorboards. It lingered, patient. I sank into the couch, careful not to disturb the alignment. The cushion smelled faintly of cold fabric and dust. Even here, I felt observed. Every item, every object, silently facing me. A floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The shadows shifted, almost imperceptibly. The apartment exhaled. Or perhaps I did. I could not tell the difference. I stared at the books again. They were aligned, perfect. Every spine angled toward me, unchanging. I could feel their attention pressing through the air, light, and dust. Even the faint hum in the walls seemed directed, pulsing, a rhythm I could not name, syncing with my own heartbeat. I lay back slowly. The shadows lingered. The books watched. The chairs leaned. The walls waited. I felt the room breathe with me, a soft exhale across my skin. The apartment alive, patient, silent, watching me. I closed my eyes. The alignment remained. Every object, every surface, every shadow facing. Alone I listened. The hum beneath the floor, the faint rustle of the air, the soft, subtle attention of the apartment. Everything observed, yet nothing moved. I drew a slow breath. The room exhaled in response. Or perhaps it was only my own fear. Either way, the watching never ended. It lingered, patient, quiet, unbroken. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Even the hum of the city seemed distant tonight. I noticed the walls first. Faint patterns like static, shivering lines that shifted under pale light. They weren't there before, or perhaps I had never noticed. The patterns moved subtly, alive in their stillness. I stepped closer. The air smelled faintly of dust and coal paint. A shiver ran down my arm. Faces appeared, fleeting, shadows that mimic features, then dissolve when I try to focus. I blinked. The wall returned to simple gray, but the feeling remained, eyes watching from the static. Each step I took made the floor hum softly beneath me. The apartment seemed to lean closer. Even the furniture, aligned, attentive, silent. I traced the patterns with my eyes. Fingers itched to touch, to feel the texture, the vibration. But the static was dry, impossible to hold. Another face emerged. It smiled faintly, then broke apart into shifting lines. I tried to hold my gaze. It was gone. A cold breeze whispered through the room. Curtains fluttered. The walls seemed to exhale. Or perhaps it was my own breath echoing in the silence. I moved toward the hallway. Shadows stretched long and thin. The static followed, always at the edges of my vision. The hum beneath the floor grew softer. The air pressed against my skin, cold and expectant. Even in stillness, I could feel the apartment watching. I paused. Faces appeared at random intervals. Faint, uncanny. Then nothing. The room exhaled again. I touched the wall lightly. No texture, no heat, no substance. Only the faint vibration beneath my fingers, a whisper of presence. I turned slowly. The kitchen shadows leaned toward me. The static patterns flickered in the corner. A face smiled briefly, then disappeared. My chest tightened. The apartment felt alive, in quiet, subtle ways. Every wall, every shadow, every whisper static seemed deliberate. I sank to the couch. The soft cushion smelled faintly of fabric and dust. I could see the static dance across the walls in the pale light. Faces appeared, fleeting, then gone. I held my breath. The apartment exhaled with me. A soft film of air, faint, waiting. The faces returned at the edges of my vision, always vanishing when stared at directly. A cruel, quiet trick. A presence that was never fully revealed. I felt the vibration beneath the floorboards again. The air pressed softly against my skin. Shadows curled toward the corners. The apartment's gaze remained. I rested my hand on the armrest. The fabric was cool, unyielding. The static flickered at the corners. Faint faces, brief recognition, then nothing. I closed my eyes. The whispers of the walls continued. The subtle hum beneath the floor persisted. The apartment breathed in rhythm with me. And in the quiet, I understood. It watched, not loudly, not with intent I could see, but with patience, a slow, silent vigilance. I lay still. The static pulsed lightly. The shadows lingered, and the apartment watched. Alone, patient, unseen yet always present. The night hung heavy. Streetlights flickered faintly, casting pale light across the asphalt. The air smelled of damp concrete and faint smoke from distant chimneys. I noticed it across the street first. A figure, motionless, in the window of another apartment. Eyes fixed, watching. I blinked. The figure shifted. A slow, deliberate movement, closer to the edge of the glass. My pulse slowed, though my chest felt tight. The curtains swayed softly with the draft. The hum of the city seemed to hush around me. I looked away. A reflex. When I dared glance back, it was nearer, leaning slightly forward. Its gaze locked on me. The apartment behind me felt colder. Walls pressing faintly, as if echoing the tension across the street. Shadows pulled in corners, unmoving but alive. I stepped closer to the window. The glass was cool against my fingertips. Breath fogged softly. The figure didn't flinch. I tried to focus on details. Shape, movement, impossible to distinguish fully, always blurred at the edges. A shadow within a shadow. The street below was empty. No footsteps. No whispers. Only the soft rustle of wind against the buildings. I looked away again. Heart thumping. A fog of hesitation in my mind. Then, the figure had moved. Closer to the center of the window now. Its presence was deliberate. Measured. A silent communication through distance and light. I stepped back. Curtains brushing my arm. The apartment hummed faintly with the vibration of my own unease. Cold air pressed against my skin. I couldn't see a face, but I felt eyes intent and patient. Shadows pulled more densely, waiting, observing. I lingered there, frozen. The figure tilted slightly, mimicking movement, mimicking breath. Then, stillness. Perfect stillness. I dared not blink. Every subtle motion made the air sharper. The hum beneath my feet seemed louder. The walls leaned faintly inward. When I looked away for a single heartbeat, it had moved closer again. The apartment across the street, so familiar, yet alien, the distance shrinking silently. I pressed my palm to the glass. The chill seeped through. A shiver traveled up my spine. The figure remained. Silent. I sank to the floor, leaning against the wall. The street lights flickered again. The figure shifted with the darkness, closer, always closer. Breath shallow, eyes wide. The feeling of being observed intensified. A soft, inescapable dread settled into my bones. I watched it for what felt like minutes, or hours. Time dissolved in the weight of the gaze. Finally, I dared to whisper. My own voice, a fragile echo. The figure didn't respond. It only lingered, patient, measured, alive in its stillness. The apartment behind me was silent. The street was silent. The world held its breath, and the figure waited. Across the way, always across the way, alone, observed. I remained where I was, watching, waiting. The night pressed in heavy and thick. Shadows pooled in corners. The faint hum of the city felt distant, swallowed by the apartment's silence. I heard it first as a creak, soft, hesitant. The locked door at the end of the hall groaned, almost as if it breathed. I paused. Air tasted faintly of cold metal and dust. The floorboards beneath my feet whispered under the shift of my weight. It groaned again, a long, low sound that vibrated through the walls, almost begging. I resisted the urge to move closer. The apartment felt smaller, each breath heavier, denser, filled with tension I could almost touch. Cold seeped under my skin, crawling up my spine. The door shivered, wood against wood, a subtle rattling, like fingernails tracing the edges. I pressed myself against the wall, heart thudding, listening. Curiosity pulled at me, a soft, insistent tug. The door seemed alive, waiting, breathing, patient. I reached for the handle. Fingertips hovered just above the cold metal. I drew back. The vibrations pulsed through my palm before it even touched the surface. Silence fell, heavy, expectant. The air smelled faintly of rust and old paper. Even the hum of the building seemed to pause. It groaned once more, longer this time, shaking, whispering like a plea. I could almost hear a voice behind it. I stepped closer. The floorboards whispered beneath each careful footfall. The walls leaned faintly inward, shadowed and dark. Cold pressed against my cheeks. The door shivered again. A soft, desperate sound. My chest tightened, a pang of quiet panic. I touched it this time. Cold, smooth, impossibly solid. The vibrations hummed through my bones. Almost a heartbeat. Curiosity fought fear. A quiet, gnawing insistence. I leaned closer, listening. The door seemed to pulse under my breath. The hallway air felt thick. Each shadow stretched longer, reaching toward me, swaying with a faint tremor of the door, rustling in the corners, soft, untraceable. I pressed my ear to the surface. Warmth of breath meeting cold wood. A shiver rolled through me. The door quivered as if responding. I stepped back, still trembling. The vibration lingered, a subtle, undulating hum. I could feel it through the floor, through the walls, almost through the air itself. The apartment held its silence again. The door stood still, yet I could still feel it waiting, alive. I lingered there, hand hovering, torn between fear and that quiet, unyielding curiosity. The hum subsided slowly. The shadows receded, almost reluctantly. The air grew lighter, yet cold pressed faintly on my skin. I left the hall, back into the dim light of the living room. Heart still quick, breath shallow, but the door still waited. And I knew it would never forget. It would never stop. Its quiet, insistent longing would remain for me, alone in the stillness of the night. The night had fallen heavy, draping the apartment in a pale, restless fog. The air smelled faintly of cold plaster and something metallic, subtle, unseen. I moved slowly, each step tentative, hearing the floorboards sigh beneath me. The walls, they had changed, not dramatically, but enough. Corners pressed closer, as if the apartment were drawing in a breath. Hallways stretched longer, thinner, shadows pooling in new creases. I could feel it, the subtle shift beneath my skin, in my chest. I ran a hand along the wall. Cold, smooth, solid, but different. A faint vibration pulsed under my palm, like the building's slow heartbeat. I withdrew it quickly, shivering. The kitchen door was farther than I remembered. Its familiar creak echoed longer, deeper. The fridge hummed a low, almost mournful tone, though it had not been plugged in. The apartment breathed. I could feel it in the way the air thickened near the corners. The rustling of curtains seemed sharper, more deliberate. Even the faint hum of the radiator carried a strange cadence, almost intentional. I stepped into the living room. The sofa leaned slightly, just enough to disturb the angle I remembered. Bookshelves were tilted, shadows spilling on the floor in new patterns. I blinked. The air smelled faintly of old paper and dust, but tinged with something else, something alive. Hallways stretched unnaturally. The door frames quivered as I passed. A low, distant thrum echoed behind the walls. Each footstep seemed measured against that hum, as if something inside the apartment were pacing, keeping time. I turned a corner. I thought I knew. The wall was closer. I brushed it with my fingertips. Cold, firm, yet it felt aware of me. A shadow shifted across the ceiling. I froze, breath catching. It lingered, stretched, then folded back into the darkness. The hum of the apartment seemed to deepen, grow heavier, almost a warning. I tried to retrace my steps. The hallways stretched farther than before, corners twisting subtly. Doorways were misaligned, frames leaning slightly inward. It was still my apartment, but not entirely mine anymore. The air felt thicker near the bedroom. A faint rustling, soft, deliberate, moved through the walls. Cold brushed against my cheek, as if the building exhaled when I paused. I could taste it on my lips, metallic, sharp, impossible to ignore. I pressed my palm against the hallway wall. It vibrated faintly, humming in a strange musical pulse. My heartbeat tried to sink, trembling. The apartment knew. It always knew. I stepped forward, floorboards whispering underfoot. The living room felt impossibly long. Shadows pooled where they had never been. The sofa leaned farther now, books tilted toward me, silently observing. I paused in the center of the room. The apartment seemed to shift beneath my feet. Walls expanded and contracted subtly, corners narrowing, ceilings breathing. The air smelled of damp stone and distant smoke. I wanted to leave, yet every door seemed farther away than it should be. Every step echoed with that low hum, like the apartment's quiet warning. I was alone, and yet I could feel it watching, waiting, aware of every pause, every breath. I sat on the sofa, heart pounding, eyes tracing the shifting angles. The walls sighed, bending, stretching, shifting. The apartment, it was alive, and I was inside it. I could not tell if time had slowed, or if the apartment simply moved faster than I could follow. The air smelled colder now, carrying a whisper of rustling paper and distant footsteps. A faint vibration ran through the floorboards. I exhaled slowly, trying to center myself. The apartment settled briefly, a deceptive calm. Corners softened, shadows recoiled. But I knew it would never be still, and I would never walk these halls the same way again. Each step measured, watched, in the apartment that shifted around me. The room was still. Outside, fog pressed against the windows. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cold plaster and dust, lingering in soft eddies. A pale light hovered near me. Not harsh, not warm, just there. It moved when I did, not directly behind, not at my feet. It lingered in corners, brushing the edges of my vision. I turned my head slowly. The light shifted, following. A gentle hum seemed woven into the air, vibrating softly under my skin. I shivered, brushing a hand along the wall. It had weight, somehow a subtle presence, not solid but aware. The hallway stretched longer than before. Shadows bent toward the glow. I could smell cold stone and faint smoke, subtle, almost imagined. The light pulsed as I took a step. Softly, deliberately, I paused near the doorway. The light lingered. Fingers of it brushed the edges of the floorboards. Warmth? Or just the suggestion of warmth against the chill of the apartment? I couldn't tell. It followed me into the living room. The sofa leaned slightly to the side, shadows pooling in unusual folds. The hum grew a little louder, a whisper beneath the silence. I held my breath, trying to make sense of it. It had a rhythm. Not mine, not entirely, but somehow tied to me. I moved toward the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed in response. The pale light swayed, drifting with intent. It didn't scatter with the corners. It lingered, anticipating me. I touched the wall. Cold, firm, real. The light brushed my fingers as if curious. The hum deepened, vibrating softly beneath the floorboards. I drew back, pulse quickening. Every room I entered, it followed, not fixed in place, not tethered by walls or ceilings. It lingered in the space I vacated, then drifted along with me. I tried to shake the sense of being observed, but the light seemed alive, not merely a reflection, not a trick of the street lamps. A subtle awareness traced my movements. I leaned against the hallway wall. The glow pooled in the corner. It shifted slightly when I blinked, or maybe when I breathed. A faint scent of ozone tickled my nose, cold and metallic. I walked slowly, testing it. It mirrored each step, careful, almost playful. Yet there was menace beneath the calm, a quiet insistence. I paused mid-step. The light froze too. Holding, watching, waiting. I could feel the air hum around me, vibrations settling into the floor, climbing the walls. A soft, rustling echoed behind the closed doors. The glow shimmered faintly, brushing the edge of my shadow. I realized it wasn't following blindly. It was choosing, a will of its own. The living room seemed narrower, corners pressed closer, yet the light stayed near, moving along the edges of furniture, tracing contours of the apartment as if mapping it. I could smell faint paper, dust, and that metallic edge again. Every breath made the hum resonate, almost like a pulse. I tried to ignore it. I walked toward the bedroom. It followed, settling in the corners, bathing the floor in pale luminescence. I turned abruptly. It lingered, unmoved by my gaze, patient, almost sentient. I stood still. The hum softened, then deepened again, weaving around me. It felt alive, aware, curious, and impatient all at once. Every heartbeat echoed in its glow, every breath mirrored in its pulse. I exhaled slowly, the apartment's air tasting faintly metallic. The pale light hovered near me, a quiet, persistent companion, or observer, and I understood it would follow me, always, through these walls, these rooms, this shifting space. Every movement, every pause. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the pattern of its glow across the floor. The light shimmered slightly, humming in low waves. It had a will. It had chosen me. I closed my eyes. It lingered, and I shivered in the soft, knowing presence of something quietly, eerily alive. The hallway was quiet. A pale light spilled from beneath the door I had avoided for weeks. The air smelled faintly of cold stone and dust, stirred by some unseen draft. I stepped closer. The floorboards groaned softly beneath my weight. A faint rustling, like cloth shifting, echoed from behind the door. I reached out. The handle was cold, slick under my fingers. A pulse of unease traveled up my arm, quick and insistent. The door creaked open slowly. The room inside felt wrong, empty yet dense. Shadows pooled in the corners. They moved slightly as if breathing, a rhythm, matching mine. The light inside was dim, pale, and unnatural. It brushed the walls in soft waves, revealing angles that didn't quite make sense. The air carried a faint metallic tang. Or maybe it was fear, sour and sharp on my tongue. I stepped inside. The floor beneath was solid, yet seemed to press back, resisting my weight. I could hear the faintest hum, like air vibrating against glass. The shadows responded, pulsing, stretching slightly toward me, then retreating. Every corner I glanced at shifted. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was real. And yet it was... I leaned against the far wall. It was cold, slick with something I couldn't name. The shadow's rhythm matched my heartbeat, a quiet, oppressive echo. I moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if speed could summon something I wasn't ready to face. The room stretched and compressed with each step. Angles seemed sharper. The air pressed heavier against my skin. I breathed. The shadows inhaled. I paused. They paused. I could smell damp stone, faint smoke, and something else, something like old paper decaying. The hum grew, subtle, insistent, vibrating to the floor and into my chest. I felt weightless and tethered at the same time. A corner of the ceiling shifted slightly. Darkness pooled and then retracted. Soft, impossible whispers brushed the edge of my ears. Not words. Intent. I wanted to leave. I wanted to close the door behind me and pretend I had never found it. But curiosity, a quiet, gnawing need, drew me further in. The shadows pressed closer. Not attacking. Not moving independently. But aware. Observing. Waiting. I reached out, touched the floor. It was slick, unnervingly smooth, and warm beneath my fingertips. A subtle vibration ran up my arm. The shadows pulsed faster. I stood still, let the room breathe around me. The hum ebbed and flowed like a tide, soft and inexorable. I felt my heartbeat slow, then sink with the rhythm of the room. The walls seemed to lean in. The corners curved in subtle, impossible ways. Yet it wasn't threatening. It was patient, waiting for me to understand. I inhaled slowly, exhaled. The shadows pulsed in response, almost like acknowledgement. I realized I wasn't meant to resist. I wasn't meant to fight. I moved toward the center. The floor hummed beneath my feet. The air pressed close. A faint scent of smoke and wet stone lingered, grounding me in the impossible. I closed my eyes. The rhythm of shadows, the pulsing hum, the shifting walls, all became part of me. Not ownership, not surrender, but acceptance. I opened my eyes. The room remained empty, yet full. The shadows pulsed softly. The air pressed lightly against my skin. The door had no will anymore. I stepped back. The hallway stretched normal again. The pale light under the door softened, almost hesitant. I could leave, or I could stay. I didn't choose. I just understood. Some doors are meant to be closed, and some rooms will follow you forever.